So welcome to the NAPI team meeting for June 17, 2019. We're going to start out with a little bit of a different approach for today's meeting as opposed to going through like our current milestone. We have Ali and
Ohad
from Google, who are going to tell us a little bit about some work that they've done to investigate how NAPI and WASM/WASI might work together. And then once they get through that, we'll have a discussion, and if we have time, loop back to our regular meeting. So I'll let you guys take it off.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ali, and I'm working with Ohad. He's an intern on our team, and he has been looking at making WebAssembly work better for native module authors. Up to date, like what we've discovered is that not too many native modules are written with WebAssembly in mind. And there's lots of barriers there. So has been spending some time investigating those and understanding those. And to be clear, the benefit we see is that native add-ons, even with NAPI, NAPI solves the problem that you need to write them once, but you still need to compile it for all different binary targets and Node API and different distributions of Node or Node-ish things like Electron. And that is still quite a bit of a burden on native module authors. And the benefit we see in WebAssembly is that it's really a portable binary format. So I think it would be great if native module authors could actually just write once, like with somehow, and then distribute once using WebAssembly. So some of the things we discovered were, first of all, so WebAssembly, the compiler support is coming along really well, but the biggest barrier for module authors is getting the bindings written, right? So the code. So let's take libsass as an example. So compiling libsass to WebAssembly is not too difficult. You just need to do some makefile edits, and you're done. You have a WebAssembly. But how do you actually talk to JavaScript? Now, that's the difficult part. So there's projects like Emscripten and Mbind, but they're designed with a browser in mind, and they require you to actually modify your source code in order to work well. There's other technologies like WebIDL that are, one, not quite mature yet, and second, they seem to be designed with more of a sort of browser-ish use case in mind. So we do not think WebIDL would serve for the Node, would work for the Node native module ecosystem. And that's, I think, a discussion we should probably start having with the WebAssembly working groups to make sure that the JavaScript platform doesn't end up with an ideal story that is very, very focused on the browser use case and doesn't address the Node native module use case. But anyway, that's more of a digression. So right now what we discovered was there's no real tool that exists that makes it easy for native module authors to just target WebAssembly and Node. So Ohad actually came up with an idea, and it turns out independently, some other folks also came up with the same idea, so it must be good.
Yeah.
And I actually am going to share my desktop. There's a screen I want, image I want to share. I actually have never done share desktop on this thing before. So are you able to see my screen yet?
Yep.
All right, so here's a diagram, and I'll actually let Ohad talk through this one.
Okay, so basically the idea here is how we can expose an API or NAPI to a WebAssembly program. And there's kind of two approaches that you can take to that, which are either rewriting all of an API inside of, or like separately from the implementation that actually exists, and you could like emulate it using JavaScript or just like remaking some of the functionality. But the approach that I think is the most straightforward for having all the features and keeping up with like what the actual an API does is to essentially like give access directly to an API from WebAssembly. So the way I'm doing that, I guess I'll point to it with the mouse. So basically we have Node, which exposes the NAPI, and it's pretty simple to just hook into that from a native module. But hooking into that from WebAssembly is obviously going to not be straightforward because there's no way to do bindings easily. So essentially what
Can I just ask a quick question? When you say bindings, are you talking about the part where you're calling from JavaScript to, out into the native module, or is it like trying to reach back from JavaScript when you're inside of the module, or just expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
Sure. So in like the simplest case, it's going to be bridging between JavaScript and WebAssembly code because there's no like type conversions and things like that. But also bridging between WebAssembly and native C code isn't really straightforward because they work in like basically WebAssembly is sandboxed and it doesn't have access to the entire memory space of the program, which complicates things like array buffers, for example, because you can't just like access the memory that that node is allocating. And it's true for a lot of things because not all the types line up. Like for example, pointers are 32-bit instead of 64-bit inside of WebAssembly. And so there's like lots of little issues that you kind of have to resolve when going back and forth, which means that we can't just directly expose the functions. And then the other thing is just the WebAssembly API doesn't let us hook in like a normal C function. We have to write a wrapper around it that basically specifies like what the arguments and results are of that function, just because the calling conventions aren't super straightforward. So essentially what I'm doing here is, if you notice this little blue thing is the wrapper layer around an API, which should be pretty thin, other than like a couple of pain points, for example, like array buffers, like I was talking about. But for the most part, all it's doing is just re-exposing the normal NAPI functions. And what that means is that we can now call that through WebAssembly as long as we expose those functions to WebAssembly. So using the C API, we can pretty much just port those functions over.
So C API is a new proposal in WebAssembly that exposes C functions to WebAssembly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So all it's doing is basically saying like this is a native function and you're allowed to call it from WebAssembly.
So in a nutshell, I think what this enables is that if a module has been written against an API, then what we'll do is expose some NAPI imports that could be built into Node. Mm-hmm. So in an API, you could say import. So in your WebAssembly code, you could say import NAPI something from NAPI. Mm-hmm. And that basically gives you access to all of the NAPI functions. And NAPI is an abstraction over on top of the VM, right? So that basically gives you a way of talking to JavaScript. So the idea is if you have a native module that is already written against an API, then you don't actually need to modify anything. Mm-hmm. You can simply compile it to WASM, and Node will provide some of these boxes at runtime. So you can import directly from them, and that's it. Like your module works as a WebAssembly module, mm-hmm. if Node provides these APIs built in.
And I guess I assume that also is provided that you're just using WASI defined functions, or like if I go and use some Windows function call in my C code, that can't work, right?
Right. So it's basically, this is kind of focused on like how we can do things with cross-platform libraries, because WebAssembly isn't really gonna ever solve like calling like a Windows API function, just because how like separated it is from like the native platform. And so essentially like modules that would fit into this well are like things like libsass, which are like pure compute based.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So things that are IO bound aren't necessarily going to be a great use case, although in some cases WASI will expose that functionality.
Yeah. So for example, if you wanted SQLite working, then that all could be WebAssembly and that could work, including the IO parts which WASI would provide. Right. But if you're pure compute, strictly speaking, you actually don't even need WASI. right? Because you need WASI for the IOs and the system calls. And if your module doesn't use that, then
Yep.
this could be complete bonus.
Then you just need WASM, yeah.
Mhm.
No, but it sounds like at least then you'd have a consistent, like for Node, it would be consistent, and it's that, like, depending on what you're using in your module, you would still use an API to interact with JavaScript and create your module. However, if you're using a small, if you're not using anything special, you can potentially even just compile it down to something that will run everywhere through WASM,
right?
Which sounds like a great story to me, and consistent, right? As opposed to, well, if you want to do something here, go do something completely different than what you were doing before, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the goal of this is really to make it like straightforward for someone to start porting libraries to WebAssembly without really having to put like a lot of planning into how to execute it and spending like months worrying about everything. Ideally, it should be pretty much like one-to-one compatible with just the normal NAPI.
You mentioned like Emscripten and stuff. Like, do you not need to use that anymore? Like, how does the compilation step work to?
So basically, Emscripten is built on top of LLVM, and a lot of the features from Emscripten have been backported into LLVM, so that you can just use Clang and compile to WebAssembly. The difference being that Emscripten is very much built for like compiling things to JavaScript or to browser code in general, and it has a long kind of like history of doing that, I guess, which has created some like leaky abstractions, I guess, into how a lot of the interaction with the browser works. So what that means is that the APIs are generally designed for JavaScript and don't really work great inside of WebAssembly. And so one way of getting around that is really just to cut out the middleman there and do everything directly through like the WebAssembly API and just compile to like straightforward WebAssembly code. So to do that, you can just use Clang as normal and just a couple like build step changes.
Yeah, so I think of Emscripten as two things. One is a compiler that can target WebAssembly plus all of this data conversions, right? So when a C function returns a car pointer, like what do you do to it to get it to JavaScript? Now Emscripten has lots of non-standard sort of conversions that it does that are sort of very browser specific in my opinion, and also sort of non-standard things, and it just has its behaviors that you may not necessarily want in a native add-on.
Right.
So Emscripten seems like a dead end from that point of view to me.
Okay, and my brief look at WASM is it's fairly limited in terms of types and stuff, right, as well?
So there's actually a proposal that's getting somewhere, I guess, that adds like reference types, which would include a lot more of that. But for now, it's really just integers and floating point, which means that there's a lot more like conversion work we have to do.
Right. Okay, so and it has to be Clang versus GCC, or is it?
So I don't think GCC has a WebAssembly backend right now, but in theory, you could pretty much use Emscripten instead of Clang, for example, if you just disable some of the like extra code generation. And in theory, like any C compiler that compiles to WASM should work as long as it's fairly like standard.
Yeah. So I personally actually have been using the WASI SDK, which is like a packaging of LLVM with a WASI sysroot, which means that if it actually makes the life really simple in getting anything compiled, because if your function does any it uses any functionality from libc, then WASI provides it. Means that you don't actually have to figure out how to get your build working. It just works with the least amount of resistance as possible.
And is it a full libc implementation?
Well, it's implemented on top of WASI, right? So which is not POSIX. So I don't know if it's full, but the thing is, like the most obvious thing you would need in a simple C program is, hey, how does malloc work and who provides malloc?
Yep.
and how does string compare work, right? So anything up till the sys call is provided by the sysroot, like the header files that WASI provides, and then the rest is provided at runtime. There's a experimental PR from DevSnec that adds WASI support to Node. So we've been playing with that, and that actually works really well.
Okay. So that's neat. So basically, it could even be, it sounds like it could be such that modulo compilers on different platforms, your module could just compile it could compile in the same way that other modules are compiled today.
Yeah.
Right.
So in theory, the only thing to really change there is just adding like some basic support to the build system for like the WASI SDK and just adding in like the like changing where it looks for headers. But for the most part, it would pretty much be the exact same.
Yeah, that definitely sounds very interesting. So how far, do you have a repo where some of this works, or?
So where I am right now is I have most of the wrapper functions already written, and that's just all pretty much auto-generated code, and those are just binding directly into the actual API. There's a couple of things that I still have to add to that, like for more specific cases where I can't just auto-generate the code, and then I have the headers written. All of this right now is in internal repos, but I think it'll probably be open sourced relatively soon with some test code to kind of show it in action.
And will it be like a module, or there's a module like Node add-on API that you would make your app, your thing depend on, or how's that going to work?
So in the near term, some of the features that we require aren't landed in Node yet. So this is probably going to be built on top of the Node CI build, which has one of the newer versions of V8, since basically we have to backport the WASM-C API for this to really work. But that's already in the Node CI build. So right now it's probably going to be built on top of that, and then we'll take those changes out and migrate them to Node as needed.
Yeah, so short answer is actually it's a PR against Node, because the idea is that this built-in NAPI module, NAPI WebAssembly module, it makes sense for Node to provide. So it ultimately becomes a Node pull request. So it'll probably be called NAPI unstable in the spirit of how WebAssembly is doing things. Like modules are called, so the namespace, they put an unstable suffix on the namespace so that until it's really stable.
Okay. So it would be a PR which adds additional like the wrappers and stuff. What are the wrapper?
So yeah, so basically the wrappers are just going to be it's not a lot of code that really has to be added. It's just one small wrapper for every function in NAPI, and then all that it's doing is basically overriding how Node passes in, or I guess in this case it would have to override how V8 passes in imports to WebAssembly, just because we have to add some default ones, and that'll just be a simple change to V8, and then Node will automatically pass these in as long as the feature flag is enabled. But in terms of how the code will be, it'll be a separate file from the actual NAPI stuff. It'll share the same headers most likely, and yeah, so basically just a couple extra functions and then something that passes that into WebAssembly code.
Definitely sounds interesting.
Yeah, and then I guess if you look at the diagram, you can kind of see where these different parts are. So the wrapper is just going to be doing what NAPI's doing, and it's kind of parallel to WASI support. because they're accomplishing the same kind of goal of exposing like a native API to WebAssembly modules.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And oh, what did I do? So both of those will be bridged to WebAssembly modules through the C API, which just allows you to pass those functions in. And other than that, there's not really any changes that have to be made to Node. So basically all it's doing is just making that automatic to pass those in.
So I guess, when do you think there'll be code like that we could take a look at or
So,
play with?
so I don't think that it will take very long to be at a point where like the code works, but there are a lot of changes I have to do to the build system, I guess. Like JIP won't really work here out of the box, and so I'm still gonna have to look into that. But I don't think that like the actual wrapper code and headers and all that should be done by the end of this week at the latest, I think, unless there's like some big thing.
Yeah, we'll try our best to get it like public as soon as possible. It's hard to get to get a confirmed date, but yeah,
Sure. It's just like if it's a week or 2 weeks, it doesn't matter. It's like just wanted to know if it was like that kind of time frame or longer.
Right. Yeah. So I think this is pretty near term. Having it like work out of the box is probably going to take like the remainder of the summer, just because there's a lot of kind of like changes that I'm going to have to make, so that like whenever you build a native module, it knows like to build with the WASI SDK and to like enable the WASI sysroot and stuff like that. But yeah.
What like once something like we're doing for HTTP3 is we have a separate repo with a fork. Does that make sense here, or is the code small enough that you think like just a direct PR that can land makes sense?
I think what we'll do is once we have an idea of the size of the PR on our side, like we can work on our fork, right, and then figure out whether it makes sense to make it a official fork and so that people can collaborate on it, or if it's pretty much done, then it can just become a PR.
Sure. Okay. Because it would be great if we can get something out there like if it's going to hang open and have a huge amount of discussion before it could land. It'd be nice to have it somewhere people could like clone and work with and contribute versus waiting for that. So
yeah. So I think in a week or so we'll have an idea of but we should have at least something we can share from a proof of concept point of view, and then we can go from there.
Okay, yeah, no, that sounds good. I think a few people I'll certainly want to try it out, and I suspect a few other people from the team here, as well as other people who, like you mentioned, were like talking about this kind of approach. It's interesting, like I hadn't thought of so the main problem this is solving is the interfacing back and forth, which I guess there have been other things talked about, but sounds like this will be an easier way for module owners to move to.
Right. Yeah. So because I guess the needs of a WebAssembly module on Node versus the browser are going to be so different, I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of pick like a Node specific solution here.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically the reasoning behind Nappy, and just the fact that it's so easy to like it gives us all the information we really need to write bindings. So
right.
The flip side of that argument is that like the fact that Node needs an entirely different solution than the web means that like the ecosystem is again like not converging.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important, but I think it's something worth considering. But I think that's something we should take up with the WebAssembly working groups to make sure that the solutions being designed there are actually serving the need of both the web and Node.
Yeah, I mean, it's like because the browsers could support an API like by pulling in support for that into the browser, like into the core itself, right? Do you think that's something V8 would ever consider doing?
Well, I think we need to start. So we are actually meeting with some WebAssembly folks on this problem. The fact that WebIDL is not sufficient for the needs of the native module also. For this use case, WebIDL doesn't work.
Right.
So if we are creating something like an API binding to WebAssembly for Node, now the browser is never going to have it. So that tells us that I think there's some problem that we're not solving in a general way on the WebAssembly side. So it's possible that there's a more generic solution that can be like that we agree with, that everybody can have this API that just works universally everywhere. Or we take an API as a starting point and iterate from there, or we say actually an API is pretty good, and that probably works even in the browser side. So I think those conversations need to be started. I'm not sure if anybody's from my point of view. I don't see too many people thinking about native modules and WebAssembly, or there doesn't seem to be a lot of practical uh, feedback that I've seen on people trying
Right.
to use WebAssembly and Node together. So it seems like uncharted territory at this point.
Okay. Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see some of those discussions. Like I'd mentioned, like actually an API, the implementation's already split out into like a node specific piece. And the piece we think is a generic JavaScript set of APIs, because there was like another implementation that wanted to use an API, but wouldn't necessarily have had the node bits. So it might be that that subset would be the thing that would make sense for browsers versus the whole thing. But
Yeah.
and yeah, so I'll be interested. Who is it you're talking to on the WASM side?
So we actually talked to Adam Klein, and he noticed this issue as well. So and we're talking to some more folks at Google who are working on WebAssembly, and get their take on it, and figure out how, like, what are the right channels to talk about this. So
Okay.
yeah, I think it makes sense to loop people, like to get you all looped into those discussions. So
Yeah.
once I know some names that you can talk to, I can share them.
Okay, that'd be great. And like, so I have set up. I guess I haven't confirmed yet, but for July 8th, we're planning a meeting with a few people from the WebAssembly team. So you might want to come back, and because I think this, with the the scope of that was to say, like, let's talk to see if we could understand the sort of overlap, synergy, non-synergy, and this, what you've described had kind of been pitched. So to say is like, is that at all within the sort of approach? How does it line up with the future that they see or not, right?
Right. Yeah. Actually, that if that's with some of the folks from Mozilla, I think those would be a good set of people to actually talk about WebIDL and its applicability to Node as well.
Right. So I think so far it is, I can just tell you who, just in case you recognize their names. Let me find that. Sent. So it sounded like, so I started the conversation with Lynne, who said, yeah, it sounds like good to get together. It doesn't sound like she'll be able to make it that day, but Till and Luke were the two other people who I'm hoping will still make it on the 8th. And
yeah, so they should be quite knowledgeable. I think that would be a good discussion to participate in.
Okay.
All right, yeah, that was all from our side. We wanted to get this introduced to people, and if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, do send them our way. And as soon as we have something that we can share, that people can play with and provide feedback, we'll post it to the working group people.
Sounds great. So yeah, no, thanks a lot for the presentation, and we'll look forward to seeing some of the code and having the future conversations.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, so let's just flip back to our regular agenda. I'm going going to Node.js. Choose milestones. I'm going to share this. Okay, so I've any other agenda items or things that people want to discuss before we get into the things that are tagged for the milestone? No, okay. I think I opened this one. There was just a feature request. So this had to do with being able to set the length property of functions, I guess. And I just tagged it because I thought that we should probably talk a little bit about it and decide if like we think it makes sense. And I don't know if you two have any thoughts on.
How would this be used? I'm just curious.
I think so. I haven't spent enough time thinking about it myself, but I think that the number of parameters, like you would basically say, I tell it that I'm creating a parameter, I'm creating a function, and I know that the number of parameters is 2, for example.
All right.
I'm not quite sure how that gets set behind the scenes now.
Yeah.
But what I'm guessing is that there's some overhead in basically not telling the runtimes or the JavaScript engines how many parameters there are. So that it would be more efficient to have flavors that would let you say those things.
Okay.
But I think before I could properly answer your question, I need to do some more research myself as well.
Okay.
So maybe unless we'll leave it on the agenda, and hopefully
Okay.
we'll do that to basically answer why it really makes sense in terms of efficiency or whatever.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go back. Next one. What should go into an API 5? I think we talked about this last week and came up with an answer of what was going to be in 5 and 6. So I don't think there's going to be anything anything really new to talk about on this front, unless you guys have something.
No.
No. Okay. We talked about some additional async worker variants. I don't think there's anything new on that one either. No. Nappy version in Node.js. So Nicola, I think you were working on that, right?
Yeah, I updated the PR.
Yep.
Because Gabriel found my typo error, but it's all set.
Okay. So in the end, we left it as having 2 versions, 2 defines.
Yeah, what I did here is to retrieve the to expose the Nabi version, and I used the Nabi version in the node_version.h.
Yeah.
Because it's the real Nabi version exposed by the runtime.
Yeah.
And an add-on developer can use the Nabi build version variable on binding.zip. So,
Okay.
and it's exposed even if on a process dot I don't remember precisely all the just a second. Okay, so okay, process.config.variables. And we have even if process versions dot NAPI. So yeah, I tested.
Yep.
And yeah, but the difference is that the variables are exposed on config zip, and it's used by Node.js, and you can access to these variables on your binding.zip. So I think that this was the initial request, and for me it's okay.
Yeah, no, it looks good. Okay, so this is basically next step on this one is just to get it landed, it looks like to me.
Okay.
Okay. Here, I won't even. We have a CI run, so let's just do. Might as well kick this off before we forget. Just CI. This is 28. Oops. Oops.
Maybe
Wrong
I just
issue
did the
number.
wrong one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
the wrong issue. The
Okay.
wrong,
That's this one, right?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that other one will not succeed anyway. Okay, so 23,944. What am I doing? Okay, no, that's fine. Twenty-seven eight three five. 27,835. Okay, so that's the right. Okay, so that's good. Go back to the milestone here. So that one's good. Workshop. This one, I think, Jim, you mentioned that they're all submitted.
Everything's submitted. We should hear back from Node.js Interactive around July 31st. NodeConf, they're not letting us know when they'll make their decision.
Okay.
But we're good. Got everything submitted.
Yeah, okay. So nothing, but we might as well leave it till we hear one way or the other. We can leave it open. I think this one, I think this one, there's not necessarily anything new there, except that I do know that there've been some submissions in terms of like a PR to add some new signatures. So Kevin had, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was those 3 signatures there based off of the feedback that we had like a month or 2 ago.
Yep, no thanks. Did that land? I'm trying to remember.
So that PR is there as well as some tests.
Okay, so let's just see, GitHub. Node.js, no. Right, I think I actually landed that. If
It's like the 5th one from the top, make callback optional.
Okay. Okay, I'd reviewed it. So yeah, I'll probably go ahead and land that. There hasn't been any other comments or objections. So
one thing that you did point out was the use of an API env over the C++ wrapper.
Yep.
And also another thing that was pointed out by Gabe for the thread safe functions. And the person that was working on that PR basically noticed that the code is really half-half. Sometimes they use the API env and sometimes it uses the wrapper.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the nappy env is the right one, and it generally just works out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's something maybe we need to go back and like make an effort to make it consistent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so that's all I have.
Okay. No, but yeah, thanks for doing that, and I should get back this week to get that in.
Sorry, Michael.
Yep.
Can you see the first PR? And okay, yes. I did the review for this API,
Okay.
and here he named he called it the method number value. So I'm not very sure if it's the right name. So
yeah, what does it wrap? Let's take a look at
it's he are wrapping the date. So the
right. Okay, so it returns the.
So for me, maybe you have as a result a double that is a number of milliseconds since
Right.
the 1st January. But maybe we can call this method the time value. I don't know. Number value, I'm not sure about number.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, is there like a standard? Right, the milliseconds since epoch. I wonder if just something like millis makes any sense.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll confuse people though if they think it's just like the millis. Millis since epoch.
But even if a number could be confusing.
Right. Yeah. No, I know. Like the current millis.
Yeah, it's used in many languages, primary languages. Current milli.
Right. So I'm just wondering if maybe that would be more obvious. Java date. Actually, yeah, there's a.
Or current time millis.
I'm just looking at. Yeah, something like current time millis to me sounds like there's no equivalent in JavaScript, is there?
Okay.
I was just briefly looking. I don't see anything. It's only when you typecast the date to a primitive number is when you get a number. I don't see any function or anything, but still looking.
Oh, there's a get milliseconds. Though that probably just gets you.
That's the milliseconds of the date.
Yeah, it says get the
Yeah.
return the milliseconds from the current date and time. So that doesn't. That's not it.
Yeah, it's if you pass the date to the number constructor, you get a number. I don't see
Okay.
Yeah, there is the UTC of the method of the that returns the number of milliseconds.
Well, actually, now, if you say date.now, it gives you the number of milliseconds since 1970 0101.
Yeah.
So maybe, does it make any sense to just use that?
Yeah, I agree. I'm asking because the first proposal number value could be not appropriate.
Right.
I think the code is good. I think that we need to decide the name.
Right. So maybe, so I'm just going to chime in. Maybe like.
Sorry, Michael. I commented not here, but maybe.
So you added a comment already? Okay.
Moment has a.
Okay, here, Michael.
Right.
No.
Higher
Moment has a function called Unix that returns the Unix, what they call the Unix timestamp. So I'm just throwing that as how another package is to solve this.
Here, when I'm explaining, I'm not sure about the name of.
Yeah. So do we want to say it was like now to match the now? Script side. So what was that? You said it was Unix?
Yeah.
In Moment, the Unix function returns the number of seconds. So one alternative might be Unix ms for Unix milliseconds.
How about millis?
Or millis.
To.
I don't think now really makes sense because date now is static on the date, but here the date is not the object. So saying now really doesn't make sense to me.
Maybe current time millis for maybe, or Unix millis, or.
Yeah, which do we? Okay, so the date.now is. Right, okay, because, that's basically giving you the current time millis, not related to what's inside of it. Okay.
Correct.
Good point. To time string, to UT string, value of. So really, it's only if you cast it as a number that it gives you the,
Yeah.
Of the ones we've talked about so far, Unix millis sounds like the most obvious to me.
Yeah, I think it's something people are familiar with. And the Unix epoch is pretty standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really match. Is that what? Yeah, to approximately match what's because you said that they used Unix in the name of for moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay. I think I'd be happy with that, but sorry, go ahead.
I'm also thinking that, you know, like since with the date object, when you cast it to a number, that's when it returns that milliseconds. What about having the function named toNumber? Because a bunch of the other, we do have a bunch of like toNumber, toObject, toBoolean for the other NAPI classes.
Right.
It would just be that, you know, you would have to know that when you cast a date to a number, you get the milliseconds.
Yeah.
I do like the 6 millis because it's very descriptive in the name, but just also throwing toNumber out just to sort of map. You know?
Conversion functions and symbol. How casting
Work.
What do people think?
I like the toNumber since it's consistent with what the other stuff we've got going.
Yeah, I like the toNumber. It's consistent. It's very JavaScripty in relation to NAPI, Node add-on API rather.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just taking a quick. Why don't I see that? Sorry, I'm just looking at the inl.h because toNumber. Yeah, we have a value toNumber to string. Yeah, probably fits best with the else source. So yeah, if it sounds good, it's everybody okay with toNumber? Objections? Look at this. You can still hear me.
Oh, Michael, I'm having difficulties hearing you.
Okay. I was just saying, does that look good to everybody? So toNumber, it sounded like everybody was agreed with that.
It could be your microphone, Michael.
Okay, let me try.
Yeah, the same here.
Okay, let's see. Is that by chance any better?
It's a little bit better. It started maybe 2 minutes ago. Kind of a back. Whenever you speak, there's kind of a background humming sound.
Let me just see if I can switch. Where are we here? Switch. Okay.
Okay, is that any better?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I switched microphones, so hopefully. Okay, so I was just trying to ask if like everybody, it sounded like everybody likes toNumber the best, and that's what we should suggest.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so this is the comment I had, like from discussion in an API2 meeting, we suggest toNumber. It's similar to some of our other conversion functions and similar to how casting to a number does conversion on the JavaScript side.
Yeah.
Okay, I will make that. Okay, so we were talking about this one. I don't know, Kevin, if you had anything else you want to add on that front.
No.
Okay. Fix object practice. Okay, no, these are pull requests. So actually, I'm going to go back to the milestone here and go back to, right, because we were talking about that, and that Kevin had added PR. So Jim, you're working on the SQL8 ports?
Yeah, yes, I am. So in the unit tests, the vast majority of those are coming from libuv. So I'm now in the process of understanding how I need to come up to speed on libuv and then understand how SQLite's using it.
Okay, and see if we can remove that usage and use.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So anyway, making progress there.
Okay, sounds good. So like I think last we were talking, you were debugging like a crash or something. You've worked around that, or
no?
That's where it's coming from.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, all of the crashes seem to be with libuv.
Okay. That would make some sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think there's nothing else specific to talk about, and we're pretty much at the end of the hour. Is there anything else that any of you wanted to bring up or discuss this week?
I will not be able to be on the call next week.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for the heads up. Anybody else?
I'm also be gone next week.
Okay. Next week is it something special or just summer?
It's
Summer.
special for me.
Okay, yeah. No, because I know.
No. Yeah, no holidays or anything.
Okay, because the week, so I won't be here 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Because that is Canada Day, so it's a holiday in Canada. So
excellent.
So I guess I won't see a few of you for a few weeks, but we'll talk in GitHub and whatever.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for everybody for taking the time, and we'll talk to you all later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.